For years, Johnny Depp was known for the wild charm that made him one of Hollywood's most unforgettable figures. But recently, people have stopped whispering about the court battles and scandals and started whispering about something far more personal: how drastically he has changed. Those who saw him at recent events could barely recognize the man who once carried entire movie franchises on his shoulders. Some wonder what he endured to look this different. Others believe his transformation says more about the pain he survived than the roles he ever played. The childhood that set the foundation for a lifetime of hurt. Long before the world argued about Johnny Depp's trials, his marriages, or his astonishing comeback, he was just a quiet boy trying to survive a home that never felt safe. Born on June 9, 1963 in Owensboro, Kentucky, Johnny entered a family already weighed down by instability. His mother, Betty Sue, carried a violent temper that could explode without warning, and his father, John Christopher Depp, was too gentle and too afraid to stand between her anger and the children who suffered under it. By the time Johnny turned 7, the family had already moved countless times, and the constant displacement turned every new house into another temporary shelter rather than a home. He later said they moved nearly 40 times before he was 15, each relocation leaving him more detached, more unsure of where he belonged. In Miramar, Florida, where the family lived in a motel for nearly a year, the loneliness became unbearable. School offered little relief. Other kids bullied him for being strange, quiet, or simply different. And at home, the tension was constant. When Johnny was 12, his mother gave him a guitar, a gift that became his only escape. He learned chords the way some children learn how to run from danger, using music to drown out the chaos around him. But before long, escape took other forms. By 12, he had already begun smoking, drinking, and experimenting with drugs, trying to numb a world that felt too sharp and too unpredictable. When his parents divorced at 15, the fragile structure of his life finally broke. His mother collapsed into depression, and Johnny suddenly became responsible for tasks no child should carry: collecting child support checks, caring for his siblings, and absorbing the weight of adult problems far too early. School became impossible to manage. At 16, he dropped out of Miramar High School to chase music, the only thing that didn't feel like a dead end. Even when he tried to return 2 weeks later, the principal told him to follow his dreams instead. It was an unexpected blessing, but also a reminder. He had no place left to go except forward, even if he had no idea where that road would lead. The accident into acting and the fame that nearly broke him. By the early 1980s, Johnny Depp was still trying to survive on music alone. His band, The Kids, later renamed Six Gun Method, had raw talent, real ambition, and absolutely no money. They slept in cheap apartments on worn-out floors, and sometimes inside a friend's old 1967 Chevy Impala. Johnny sold ballpoint pens over the phone just to afford food. His marriage to Lori Ann Allison in December 1983 gave him emotional support, but even then, life was still a string of dead ends and unpaid bills. Then fate stepped in, quietly, almost accidentally, through Lori's friendship with a rising young actor named Nicolas Cage. Cage saw something in Johnny that Johnny himself couldn't see. During long conversations in Cage's apartment, he suggested acting. Not as a dream, but as a way to pay rent. Depp resisted at first. He didn't think he had the talent, but Cage pushed him toward his agent, and that led straight to an audition with Wes Craven for A Nightmare on Elm Street. Oddly, Johnny wasn't even trying to win the role. He was simply supporting a friend who wanted the part. Craven didn't think much of him at first either, until Craven's teenage daughter saw Johnny's headshot and insisted that he was perfect. That one moment changed everything. The $1,284 per week paycheck felt unreal to a young man who had spent years sleeping on floors. And when his death scene became one of the most iconic in horror history, Hollywood suddenly knew his name. But success didn't mean comfort. After Elm Street, Johnny still didn't trust acting as a future. He drifted through small roles in Private Resort and Platoon, uncertain if he belonged in this world of auditions, contracts, and expectations. Everything changed in 1987 when he replaced another actor on 21 Jump Street. Almost instantly, he became a teen idol, famous in a way he never wanted to be. Every magazine cover, every screaming crowd, every scripted smile felt like someone else living inside his skin. Behind the scenes, he worked 15-hour days, battled exhaustion, and grew resentful of the machine that demanded he play a character even when cameras weren't rolling. He once said he felt like a product, a puppet whose strings were controlled by a studio that cared only about ratings. The fame he had stumbled into was becoming its own kind of prison. Breaking the mold, finding Burton, and becoming a Hollywood icon. By the time 21 Jump Street reached its peak, Johnny Depp felt more trapped than celebrated. The fame was loud, relentless, and shallow, nothing like the life of meaning he had once imagined for himself. So when his contract finally ended, he made a decision most actors would never dare to make at the height of popularity. He walked away from the show that made him famous. Exhaustion and disappointment pushed him toward a different path. One defined not by fan mail and magazine covers, but by strange, difficult, deeply emotional roles that spoke to the outsider inside him. That turning point led him straight to Tim Burton, a filmmaker who understood misfits better than anyone in Hollywood. Burton saw what others couldn't, that beneath the teen idol exterior lived a man overflowing with vulnerability, imagination, and a quiet sadness shaped by childhood scars. In 1990, when Burton offered him the lead role in Edward Scissorhands, Johnny found the character he had been waiting for. Edward wasn't a hero or a heartthrob. He was lonely, gentle, misunderstood, and trapped by something he never asked for. Johnny understood him instantly. "Edward was me," he said later. Despite competing against names like Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise, Depp became Burton's choice. Yet filming wasn't easy. The heavy scissor hands made every movement difficult, and because Edward barely spoke, Johnny had to express everything through his eyes and posture. He lived in constant fear of being fired, convinced every day that he wasn't good enough. But as filming continued, something shifted. The role that had terrified him became the performance that transformed him. When Edward Scissorhands premiered in December 1990 and earned him his first Golden Globe nomination, audiences and critics finally saw what Burton had seen all along. Over the next decade, the two created a string of unforgettable films: Ed Wood, 1994, Sleepy Hollow, 1999, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, 2005, Sweeney Todd, 2007, and Alice in Wonderland, 2010. Each one pushed Depp further away from the teen idol box and closer to becoming one of Hollywood's most respected character actors. By the time Pirates of the Caribbean arrived in 2003, he was ready to shock the world again. Not with a safe role, but with the most unpredictable pirate Hollywood had ever seen. Jack Sparrow, global fame, and the fall that followed. When Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl hit theaters in July 2003, nobody expected Johnny Depp to rewrite the rules of blockbuster cinema. Disney executives were terrified of his choices. The slurred speech, the off-balance swagger, the half-mad confidence. But Johnny had a vision. He saw pirates not as grim warriors, but as rock stars of the 18th century. He borrowed swagger from Keith Richards, mischief from Pepe Le Pew, and courage from every outsider he had ever played. What emerged was Captain Jack Sparrow, a character so original that audiences instantly understood they were witnessing something rare. The film exploded. It earned $654 million worldwide, becoming one of the highest-grossing movies of the year. Depp received an Oscar nomination for Best Actor, an almost unheard-of achievement for a comedic adventure role. Over the next decade, the Pirates franchise soared to over $4.5 billion, and Depp earned more than $250 million from the series alone. He had become one of the most famous and highest-paid actors alive, appearing in fantasies like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, billion-dollar hits like Alice in Wonderland, and critically acclaimed roles like Finding Neverland and Sweeney Todd, which earned him 2 more Oscar nominations. But fame on this scale came with a dark edge. Behind the pirate grin and the global success, Johnny's life was beginning to unravel. Years of internal pain, unresolved childhood trauma, and a demanding industry pushed him deeper into alcohol, pills, and self-destructive habits. By the time he met Amber Heard on the Rum Diary set in 2009, he was already struggling, drifting between extraordinary professional highs and deeply private lows. Their relationship, which began around 2011, appeared glamorous at first, an older Hollywood icon and a rising young actress. But beneath the surface, their connection was volatile, fragile, and increasingly suffocating. After their wedding in February 2015, the cracks widened. Fights escalated, rumors grew. Both sides claimed emotional wounds, and both accused the other of inflicting them. By May 2016, after only 15 months, Heard filed for divorce and publicly accused Depp of abuse. Studios panicked, headlines exploded. And in what became one of the most dramatic falls from grace in modern Hollywood, Johnny Depp went from billion-dollar leading man to an industry exile almost overnight. The trial, the isolation, and the weight of a broken reputation. After Amber Heard filed for divorce in 2016, the world that Johnny Depp had spent decades building collapsed faster than anyone could have imagined. What might have remained a private breakup exploded into an international scandal when Heard accused him of physical abuse. Even though police officers on the scene reported no visible injuries, and even though Depp's team insisted the accusations were false, the damage had already been done. In December 2018, Heard published an op-ed describing herself as a public figure representing domestic abuse. And although she didn't mention Johnny by name, the implication was unmistakable. The industry responded immediately and brutally. Disney removed him from Pirates of the Caribbean without a meeting, without a phone call, without a chance to defend himself. He learned he'd been fired by reading it in the news. Warner Brothers later asked him to step down from his role as Gellert Grindelwald in Fantastic Beasts, even though he had filmed only 1 scene. In the span of 2 years, Depp went from one of Hollywood's most bankable stars to someone studios were afraid to be associated with. By 2020, he lost a libel case against The Sun in the UK, and many believed it marked the end of his career. But the silence that followed was even more devastating. People he had trusted for years distanced themselves. Former friends stopped returning calls. Some insiders whispered that he looked physically unwell during those months, drained, thin, exhausted by the weight of defending himself against accusations that kept multiplying online. Even his longtime collaborators admitted later that they weren't sure he would ever recover from the damage. When the U.S. trial finally began in April 2022, the world watched as Johnny and Amber faced each other in a courtroom filled with cameras, recordings, and years of buried resentment. Every mistake, every fight, every slurred voicemail and shattered moment of their toxic relationship was dissected. For 6 weeks, the public consumed their pain like entertainment. Johnny spoke about his childhood, his addictions, his humiliation, and the feeling of watching his reputation get destroyed by nothing more than vowels and consonants floating in the air. When the jury ruled in his favor on June 1, 2022, awarding him $10.35 million, Depp said the verdict gave him his life back. But it was clear that the man who emerged from that courtroom was not the same one who had walked into it. The transformation, the comeback, and the man no one recognized. After the trial ended and the public noise finally died down, Johnny Depp quietly began rebuilding himself, not as a movie star, but as a man who had survived years of humiliation, betrayal, and loneliness. And the transformation that followed stunned even those who had stood by him through the darkest moments. Between 2023 and 2024, Johnny lost nearly 100 pounds, dropping from around 230 to about 130. Insiders whispered about illness, depression, even relapse. But the truth was far more complicated. For the first time in decades, he focused entirely on his health, his mind, and the body he had spent years neglecting. Nutritionists redesigned his diet. He cut out sugar, processed foods, late-night binge eating, and alcohol. Trainers introduced him to running, strength work, and yoga, gradually rebuilding his stamina. But the biggest shift wasn't physical at all. It was emotional. Therapy, meditation, and long months of isolation helped him confront the trauma he had carried since childhood. The scars of a violent home, the chaos of fame, and the wounds from a marriage that had become one of the most publicly dissected relationships of the century. He later said that these months saved his life. Then came the transformation that shocked the internet. In 2024, as he prepared for his role in Day Drinker, he dyed his hair silver, grew a thick gray beard, and wore icy blue contacts. When Lionsgate released the first promotional photo, fans didn't recognize him. Comments flooded social media calling him unbelievable, unrecognizable, and the beginning of Johnny Depp's Silver Fox era. Some compared him to the Suave Dos Equis icon, others to his own interpretation of Gellert Grindelwald. Even those who once criticized him admitted the makeover was mesmerizing. The changes didn't stop there. After decades of being mocked for his decaying teeth, Johnny underwent a massive dental reconstruction, revealing a bright, perfectly aligned smile that dominated headlines almost as loudly as the trial once had. Photos from Spain, where he toured museums with Penelope Cruz, showed a man looking healthier, calmer, almost reborn, and Hollywood took notice. Director Mark Webb cast him in Day Drinker, and soon after, Terry Gilliam considered him for Carnival at the End of Days, even floating the idea of Johnny playing Satan himself. For a man so many had written off, it was the beginning of a chapter few expected, not a return to the old Johnny Depp, but the emergence of someone new, scarred, changed, and undeniably stronger. Johnny Depp's journey has been filled with pain, loss, and reinvention. But his newest chapter proves that transformation is possible even after the world counts you out. His resilience, his drastic physical change, and his quiet return to the spotlight have left fans both surprised and hopeful about what comes next. What do you think about Johnny Depp's new look and his comeback? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and stay tuned for more powerful stories from Hollywood's most unforgettable lives.